If there was a word that people could use to describe you, what would it be? One word. Because for me, that word is intense. So at the beginning of this year, I was diagnosed with ADHD, which is crazy because in a couple of weeks, it's going to be my 39th birthday. And that is a long time to be living without knowing what's truly going on, why I felt the way I felt for so long. So with me, my biggest struggle has always been anxiety and the never-ending restlessness. That feeling of being a dormant volcano. Now, what I mean by that is not specifically always in social situations. I'm talking about being in nature, like here, potentially lying down in very peaceful setting and just feeling like the pressure is building and getting incredibly anxious from doing nothing. So the distinction between primary anxiety, irrelevant of ADHD, or anxiety caused by ADHD is quite simple. It is, if you feel anxious because nothing is happening, that's ADHD. If you feel anxious because you think something bad is going to happen, that's anxiety. And for me, I felt that internal pressure so strongly that throughout my life, I've tried very hard to figure out what is wrong with me. And until now, I've never succeeded. I was diagnosed with OCD in my early 20s. I've tried all sorts of different lifestyle changes. I've tried different supplements, and nothing would ever fix that feeling of being incredibly on edge. Until, that is, I arrived in Perth about 1.5 years ago, and I met someone incredibly intense. She asked me to move in with her on the first day. Now, I fell for her really hard. I liked this girl like nothing else. I was drawn to her like a moth to a flame. And I now realize it's because of her intensity. She had ADHD. And she told me, and it didn't mean much to me. I saw traits in her, such as leaving things all over the place, being a bit messy, but that's not me. I don't have that side. But I did also see the intensely hyperactive side that she had, and that is me. And so it led me to start to ponder whether I should check out if I have this as well. So with ADHD, you could either be the full spectrum, or you could be predominantly AD or predominantly H. AD stands for attention deficit, which is inattentive, and that is where you leave things all over the place or you're forgetful. Then the H stands for hyperactive, impulsive, which is self-explanatory. You are feeling like you are a wound up toy. So what's actually going on under the hood? Well, with ADHD, it's basically a case of having lower levels of dopamine and norepinephrine, which makes you feel really on edge. And not very motivated, perhaps, and certainly not in the mood to be in a social situation. What's going on is your body is either not producing enough, or your brain is taking up too much too quickly, and so you've got a net loss compared to about 95% of the world's population. Needless to say, it leaves you feeling pretty crap. So that state is known as dysregulation. So what we want to do is we want to get regulated. And naturally, people who have ADHD, who don't know they have it, will find out that most of their life they've either been taking lots of drugs or doing lots of exercise to make themselves feel better. So with me, whenever I was in a social situation, now I'm in my late 30s, but in my 20s, drugs, alcohol, the whole lot. That was literally the only way to make myself feel calm. And it still doesn't really cut it. There's only two things that work, and they are literally made for ADHD, and that is amphetamine and methamphetamine. You know, it really does explain a lot when I look back at my life, because I've been grinding it out for 25 years with my fitness, and not many days go by where I just can't do it. I have to do it to make myself feel better. A good example is today I didn't take any dexamphetamine, which is a pretty common stimulant used for ADHD, and I felt pretty crap. So I went for a run this afternoon, and I am pretty burnt out from all the exercise that I've already been doing. It's not like I particularly wanted to do it, it's just I needed to do it to make myself feel a bit more calm. But the interesting thing is, I filmed the first half of this video this morning, and I felt a lot more at peace. And now that I'm filming it in the evening, I'm feeling terribly wound up, because even though I've had my run, I now know what it's like on dexamphetamine, and the difference is night and day. Let's go into a bit of detail. So, Dexies, as they're known colloquially, that stands for dextroamphetamine, which is 50% of amphetamine, the other 50% being levoamphetamine. So Dexies, what they do is they stimulate your mind and a small portion of your body, whereas levoamphetamine stimulates your body and a small part of your mind. So that's why Dexies are so perfect for ADHD, because you don't get the downsides of the full spectrum amphetamine, and you get all the good stuff. So with somebody like me who's hyperactive, it reduces my anxiety instantly. It takes about an hour to kick in, and then the rest of the day is just me walking around feeling like I'm a god, quite literally. And I'm not overstating that, because I have lived like this for 39 years and I've had to just deal with it. And I have a friend that's 60 years old and he got diagnosed at 50, and he's only been doing it for 10 years, but the difference for him is massive too. I've spoken to many people with ADHD in the last few months since getting diagnosed, and what I've learned is quite interesting. People that are predominantly hyperactive, impulsive, are going to notice the biggest bang for their buck with Dexies when it comes to anxiety. And that is because, for me, if I'm just sitting down with a group of friends or a friend in a living room, even in that situation, I'm going to get on edge. And as soon as the dextroamphetamine takes away the feeling of restlessness, for me, it's just instantly relaxing. Whereas somebody who is more inattentive and finds that they're always losing things, they're forgetting things, it's going to change their life because they're not going to forget things anymore. But in a social setting, they're not going to notice that sense of feeling like a god. It's just incredible. It's extremely common to find that people with ADHD have self-regulated, self-medicated for a very long time, potentially before being diagnosed. And that's where methamphetamine comes in. It is obviously stronger considerably than amphetamine and will raise your dopamine levels exponentially compared to amphetamine. And that is why it's extremely popular with people with ADHD, because it will make you feel very at peace, but of course it has a lot of downsides. Quick test. If you want to find out whether you have ADHD, and you suspect you may well do, you could take a Dexie. On a serious point, if you took amphetamine, 95% of the world's population are going to feel pretty damn stimulated. Whereas if you have ADHD, there's a very good chance you're going to feel calm and perhaps quite sleepy. So for me, when I take a Dexy, it has quite a sedative effect on me. And it was then really after a friend gave me some Dexys that I realized I'm not just an imposter, this really is something to look into. I look back now and I think how different life could have been up to this point. My whole 20s were filled with partying, backpacking, traveling to different countries. I've been to nearly 40 countries. I've been to party islands. I do love to party, but there's always been a catch for me. Being on edge, it gets to a point where people just think you're a bit much. So you try to do something about it. A lot of alcohol in my 20s, not healthy. And it really doesn't work. You have to be pretty blind drunk to get rid of that anxiety if you're very hyperactive. So if I'd had Dexys and I'd been diagnosed in my late teens, early 20s, it would have changed my life. And that brings me on to relationships, because I'm almost 39 and I've been single my entire life. Longest I've ever been with anyone is 2 weeks. So yes, there's probably a lot more wrong with me, but I certainly know that anxiety, being on edge, has been one hell of a big problem for me with trying to get any semblance of a relationship. Most women will run away as soon as they find out that you're just too on edge or too intense. And it's quite hurtful. Dexys would have transformed everything for me. As an example, I have put myself out there massively. When I was younger, I was a stripper for a very short amount of time. I did topless waiting. These aren't sort of things that you would think would reduce your confidence, and yet they certainly haven't helped. I have traveled a lot, I've done a lot, but the anxiety, the being on edge-ness is always there. It won't go. And so when I was being diagnosed, I said this. I said, I know there's something going on. And sure enough, I was right. So for anybody out there watching this, if you're feeling restless and on edge, and you just always have that anxiety and you don't know why, this might be the video for you. Go out and get diagnosed. Yes, it can cost a lot of money. Fortunately, I found a way in Australia to do it completely free. Legislation is changing in a few weeks. So in May in West Australia, the legislation is changing so that you no longer need a psychiatrist to be fully diagnosed and prescribed stimulant medication. Up to this point, unfortunately, that has been the case. And I was quoted an initial appointment of $600 just to have a chat, which is absolutely outrageous when we're talking about mental health. That is going to be all blown open, none of that rubbish anymore. And what you will have now is specialist GPs across the whole of Australia that can legally diagnose and prescribe. So all of this rubbish, I have a friend that's paid $280 every 6 months for a piece of paper. I found some poor woman yesterday I was talking to, it was $480, I think, every 3 months. Absolute disgrace for a piece of paper. That's all going to change. There's not going to be any more of that. It's going to be completely free for everybody. So this right now is the perfect time. If you think that you may have symptoms of ADHD, go get it checked out. I think that's quite enough for one video. I could talk forever about this. It's very new for me. I've only really had a few months to digest what's going on and take it all in. I could talk about this a lot more in another video. Until then, see you next time.